Keep your eyes on the woman walking toward the ATMs outside a late-night pharmacy. She steps under the silver-gray canopy, the lights casting a pale glow across the empty lot. This is Lydia Heron, 32, stopping for quick cash on her way home from work. The timestamp reads 9:46 p.m. as she begins her transaction. Now watch the man entering from the right side of the frame. He hesitates near the curb, then changes direction and walks straight toward her. He stands close enough to see the screen beside her shoulder, but Lydia doesn't react, focused on completing her withdrawal. The machine dispenses her cash. She pockets it and heads back to her dark red hatchback parked 3 spaces away. She unlocks the door and leans inside. Don't look away from the man. The moment her door opens, he steps off the curb and follows her out of frame. This is the last recorded footage of Lydia live. Welcome to Chills Beneath. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories. Lydia lived in Lakewood Hill, a small city south of Montgomery known for its quiet pace. She worked as an accounts coordinator for Northline Shipping and Logistics, handling billing and schedules in a converted warehouse. Her supervisors relied on her to keep organized. Her routine was steady. She woke early, arrived at work before most others, brought her lunch from home, and often stayed late when deadlines hit. She didn't socialize much during the week, but she talked with her sister, who lived 2 hours away, almost every night. Lydia valued order and predictable habits. When she needed cash for weekend errands, she stopped at the same ATM after work, a place she never saw as dangerous. On the day of the incident, she worked overtime finishing quarterly invoices, sent her sister a quick message saying she'd be late, and grabbed a small deli meal she ate at her desk. She wrapped up around 9:20 p.m., gathered her things, and left the building. Before heading home, she made one familiar stop, a quick ATM visit she had done countless times without worry. She expected it to take less than 2 minutes. It was the last normal moment of her life. The man in the footage was Trevor Maddox, 39, a drifter around Lakewood Hill who moved between short-term jobs and temporary spots to sleep. He'd recently been fired from a landscaping company after multiple female clients complained that he followed them around, asked intrusive questions, or lingered near their windows. He had no stable housing, often staying in abandoned buildings or camping near the overpass by the old garden center. Police knew him from past arrests for trespassing, shoplifting, and disorderly conduct. Nothing violent, but enough to show a pattern of instability. Earlier the night of the attack, a convenience store camera recorded him pacing near the vending machines for nearly 20 minutes, watching customers without buying anything. When a woman pulled up, he approached her car, causing her to drive off. A clerk confronted him, and he walked away toward the strip mall. Another camera at a hardware store caught him pausing near a bike rack, adjusting a shopping bag with a broken handle. Detectives later learned he carried small tools, zip ties, and scrap items inside it. Trevor's presence in the area wasn't unusual. What changed was the opportunity he saw when Lydia arrived alone. He didn't know her or plan anything. He simply reacted, moving from the curb toward the ATM, the moment he entered her life without her ever noticing. Lydia's final hours were quiet and uneventful. She spent most of her day inside her office, reviewing invoices and confirming shipments with several vendors. The workload was heavier than usual, which was why she ended up staying late. Her supervisor left around 7:15 p.m., telling her not to stay too long, but Lydia insisted she was fine and wanted everything completed before the weekend. She reheated a small dinner in the office microwave, ate at her desk, and kept working until the reports were finalized. At 9:18 p.m., she turned off her computer, gathered her belongings, and walked out of the warehouse building. A security camera above the loading dock recorded her locking the side door before heading toward her car. She didn't seem rushed or distracted, just tired from another long day. Traffic was light as she drove down the main road. She stopped briefly at a gas station across from her office to fill her tank, then turned toward the strip mall where the ATM was located. She didn't make any other stops. She played a voice memo in her car listing errands she needed to run on Saturday, groceries, laundry, and picking up a package from the post office. There were no signs of distress or danger. Her routine was normal, deliberate, and predictable. She had been to that same ATM countless times, usually without any issue. The lot was familiar, the pharmacy lights bright enough to be comforting, and the entire area was only a few minutes from her apartment. Those mundane moments, the drive, the gas stop, the list of chores she planned to handle over the weekend, filled the last ordinary part of her life. Nothing in those hours hinted that someone else was watching her or planning anything. She didn't know that a man she had never met had already positioned himself near the walkway, waiting to follow her the moment she stepped away from the machine. When Lydia parked near the ATMs, Trevor was already nearby. A hardware store camera showed him stepping from behind a column and watching her car pull in. He waited until she walked toward the canopy, then adjusted his bag and followed from a distance. A pharmacy side camera recorded him lingering near a trash bin, pretending to look inside while keeping his eyes on her. He moved closer as she began her withdrawal, acting as if he intended to use the second machine, though he never touched the keypad. A TM footage showed him shifting positions behind her, studying her actions. When she finished and walked toward her hatchback, he stayed behind only long enough to appear legitimate. The moment she opened her door, he stepped away from the ATM and moved toward her with a quicker pace. The pole camera near the pharmacy entrance caught him following her, though the angle didn't show what happened at the car. Lydia, thinking nothing was wrong, leaned inside to place her purse and get settled. Trevor used those few seconds to approach quietly, putting himself right beside her open door with no one else around. The pole camera captured the moment Trevor reached Lydia's car. She leaned inside to sit down when he suddenly grabbed the door and forced it wider. She tried to pull back, but he used his shoulder to push her deeper into the seat. From the outside, the struggle looked quick and chaotic. Lydia braced against the steering wheel and tried to shove him away, but he overpowered her and pulled the door shut. The angle didn't show what happened inside, but the car rocked slightly as the struggle continued. The interior lights stayed on for a few seconds before switching off, and then the vehicle went still. Trevor's bag was visible in the frame. Investigators later learned it held a utility knife, zip ties, and other items he'd been carrying. After forcing Lydia into the passenger seat, he moved behind her and restrained her in the tight space. She tried reaching for the door handle, but he pulled her down, keeping her trapped. Everything that followed happened out of sight behind the dark windows. Those final moments sealed her fate. Inside the hatchback, the attack happened fast. Trevor used the zip ties from his bag to restrain Lydia, forcing her hands together while keeping a tight grip on her arm. She begged him to stop, but he pulled her into the back seat and threatened her with a utility knife to keep her quiet. He robbed her first, taking the ATM cash and going through her purse. When she pleaded with him not to hurt her, he panicked, convinced she would report him and he'd be arrested again. That fear made him more aggressive. Inside the closed vehicle, out of view of every camera, Lydia fought hard, twisting away and trying to shield herself, but he overpowered her in the cramped space. When he realized she had seen his face clearly, he believed letting her go wasn't an option. The struggle escalated, and he used the knife during the final moments of the attack. Her injuries were fatal. Once she stopped resisting, he pushed her body into the rear footwell and covered her with a jacket from the back seat. The interior later revealed everything: torn fabric, smudged fingerprints, and blood transfer near the window switch. The autopsy confirmed how she died, and the evidence showed she fought for her life while he made sure she couldn't identify him. When the attack ended, Trevor stayed inside the car for several minutes, catching his breath and deciding what to do next. The pharmacy lot was still empty, and no one had seen him get into the hatchback. He moved to the driver's seat, adjusted it to his height, and started the engine. He drove out of the lot without turning on the headlights for the first several yards, then merged onto the side road leading toward the old garden center. He parked behind the building, an area mostly used by delivery trucks during the day, but deserted at night. He opened the back door, looked at Lydia's body covered by the jacket, and tried to wipe down the interior surfaces with the sleeve of her jacket. He removed her phone, tossed it into a drainage grate, and kept the wallet for the cash. He didn't try to hide the car. Instead, he walked away from it using the trail that connected the back of the garden center to the overpass. He disappeared into the wooded area where he sometimes slept, leaving the hatchback behind with Lydia still inside. He didn't turn himself in or tell anyone what he had done. He simply left the scene and returned to the life he drifted through, one where no one noticed when he disappeared for days at a time. The next morning, Lydia's absence was noticed quickly. She normally logged in before 8 a.m., but her supervisor saw no activity and her messages to Lydia didn't go through. By 10 a.m., Lydia's sister had called repeatedly, growing more worried each time her calls went to voicemail. Lydia never ignored calls unless she was asleep or working. When she still hadn't responded by early afternoon, her sister contacted police, explaining that Lydia lived alone, worked late the night before, and wasn't answering anything. Officers agreed to check on her later that day. Around 4 p.m., patrol officers arrived at Lydia's apartment. Her car wasn't in the lot, but her sister's spare key opened the door. Inside, everything looked normal. Work shoes by the door, last night's dinner container on the counter, her bed still neatly made. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. It looked like she'd planned to return soon. But with her car missing and no contact from her, concern escalated quickly. Lydia never stayed out overnight without telling her sister. With nothing in the apartment explaining her disappearance, officers activated the missing person report and began a wider search. Patrol units were instructed to check all lots and side streets where abandoned cars were sometimes found, including the old garden center, with its largely unmonitored back area. No one knew yet that it would be the place where answers waited. Around 6:12 p.m., a patrol unit scanning plates behind the old garden center spotted a dark red hatchback backed into the furthest corner. The car wasn't in a normal parking space. It was angled toward the building as though someone had parked in a hurry. The officers approached cautiously, recognizing the license plate as belonging to Lydia. The closer they walked, the clearer it became that something wasn't right. The rear passenger window was cracked open slightly. A jacket was visible through the glass, crumpled in the back. One of the officers called out Lydia's name but heard nothing in response. They opened the rear door and immediately saw her body in the footwell, partially covered by the jacket. Her posture alone made it clear she was deceased. Officers stepped back, radioed for detectives, and secured the area. They didn't touch anything inside the car. They didn't move her. They waited for the investigative team to arrive. When detectives reached the scene, they examined the interior carefully. There were clear signs of a struggle, scuff marks on the back of the driver's seat, a fingerprint smear near the window switch, and the utility knife partly tucked beneath the front seat. Lydia's purse was open on the floor, her wallet empty. Her phone was missing. Her hands still bore marks that appeared consistent with being restrained. The discovery shifted the case instantly from a missing person search to a homicide investigation. Lydia had left work, stopped at the ATM, and never made it home. Now detectives needed to find out what happened in the hours between those moments. The car was sealed, photographed, and transported to a forensic bay. Investigators prepared to pull footage from every security camera in the area. They didn't know yet that the ATM camera had already captured the beginning of the crime. They only knew the ending. Detectives gathered video from every nearby camera, and the ATM footage gave them their first clear lead. They saw Lydia withdraw cash and a man standing too close behind her before following her toward her car. A pharmacy camera briefly captured them together, and a poll camera showed him closing in as she opened her door. Hardware store footage from earlier that night showed the same man pacing with a torn-handled bag, confirming he'd been in the area long before Lydia arrived. A loading dock camera at the garden center then showed Lydia's car being parked in a rush hours later, followed by a man walking away toward the wooded trail, carrying a bag shaped like the one seen earlier. The timeline came together quickly. Lydia went to the ATM. The man followed her, forced his way into her car, and later abandoned the vehicle behind the garden center. Detectives now had a face, a sequence, and a direction. All they needed next was a name. The still images pulled from the ATM feed circulated among local businesses. It didn't take long before an employee at the hardware store recognized him. She told detectives he had been banned months earlier for harassing customers and hanging around the entrance without buying anything. She recalled his first name and mentioned that he had once filled out a service form using the name Trevor Maddox. Detectives ran the name and found multiple prior police contacts, including incidents of trespassing and loitering. They also found a series of complaints from his recent landscaping job that described behavior similar to what witnesses had seen near the convenience store earlier in the night. He wasn't a stranger to the area or the police. A background check revealed he had no permanent residence, but often stayed near the underpass close to the garden center. Officers had escorted him away from that area before. Detectives matched the physical description from his old arrest files to the ATM footage. The match was consistent enough to issue a warrant. Now they had a suspect with a pattern of disturbing behavior, a timeline that placed him in the exact location of the crime, and CCTV stills that connected him directly to Lydia's final moments in public. The only question left was where he had gone after abandoning her car. Officers launched a coordinated search across the south side of Lakewood Hill, focusing on places where Trevor was known to hide. Their first stop was the wooded area behind the garden center. Following a narrow trail toward the underpass, they found a small campsite that looked recently used. An unfolded blanket, scattered food containers, and a plastic bag with the same torn handle seen in earlier footage. They set up surveillance, and within an hour Trevor appeared, walking toward the camp with another bag in hand. Officers moved in quickly, surrounding him before he could react. He tried to run toward the brush, but a K-9 unit stopped him. After a brief struggle, he gave up and was handcuffed without saying a word. The bag he dropped held only a few clothes and papers. The real case against him was already built through video, the condition of Lydia's car, and the forensic evidence still being processed. Trevor was taken to the county jail and booked on suspicion of homicide, kidnapping, and assault as detectives finalized the charges. Lydia's autopsy confirmed what investigators already suspected. She died from multiple sharp force injuries inflicted during the struggle inside the car. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms showed she fought hard to protect herself, even with her movement restricted. The medical examiner noted that the injuries were consistent with a utility knife and occurred during a violent confrontation in a confined space. Forensic analysts searched the hatchback for DNA and fingerprint evidence. They found Trevor's fingerprints on the inside door handle, on the headrest, and on the back of the driver's seat. DNA consistent with him was found on the zip ties used to restrain Lydia. Fibers from his clothes were recovered on the rear seat upholstery, further confirming his presence in the vehicle. Lydia's hair and clothing also bore evidence of the struggle. Blood transfer patterns inside the car matched the sequence of events reconstructed from the CCTV timeline. Nothing suggested that anyone else had been present. The physical evidence supported the theory that Trevor acted alone, attacked her inside the car, and then drove it away after ensuring she was no longer alive. For investigators, the forensic results solidified the case. There were no unknown prints, no alternative suspects, and no conflicting evidence. The cameras had shown how the perpetrator entered the story. The autopsy clarified how it ended. When detectives questioned Trevor, he remained silent for several minutes, refusing to answer basic questions. They showed him still images from the ATM footage. He stared at them, but didn't respond. When they pressed him, he finally muttered that he didn't do anything to that woman. Detectives continued, laying out pieces of the timeline gradually. When they revealed that Lydia's car had been found behind the garden center and that they had recovered forensic evidence linking him to the scene, Trevor became visibly unsettled. He started shifting in his seat, his voice shaking as he insisted he didn't mean for anything to happen. He said he only approached her for money, claiming he thought she would walk away unharmed if he took her cash and left. When detectives asked why he forced himself into her car, he had no answer. When they asked why her phone was discarded in a drainage grate, he looked away and shook his head. Eventually, he admitted he panicked when she resisted. He said he thought she would ruin his life by reporting him. He insisted he didn't go to the ATM that night with a plan to kill anyone. But the choices he made after forcing his way into her car contradicted that claim. His statements were inconsistent, shifting between denial, anger, and brief moments of admission. But by the end of the interrogation, detectives had enough to corroborate the entire sequence. His motive became clear. He wanted money, acted impulsively, and escalated the attack when he feared being identified. When the case went to trial, prosecutors presented a straightforward narrative built on surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and Trevor's own partial admissions. They outlined how Lydia arrived at the ATM alone, how Trevor approached without making a transaction, and how he followed her to her car. They showed the poll camera footage that captured the moment he forced his way inside, and the loading dock footage of him walking away from her hatchback. The forensic team testified about the fingerprints found inside the car, the DNA recovered from the zip ties, and the blood evidence that matched the medical examiner's findings. The autopsy results left no doubt about how Lydia died and the order in which her injuries occurred. Trevor's defense argued that he had not intended to kill her, suggesting the situation escalated unexpectedly, but the prosecution emphasized the choices he made: approaching her from behind, entering her car without permission, restraining her, assaulting her, and ultimately taking her life before driving away and attempting to hide her vehicle. After several days of testimony, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. The judge reviewed Trevor's record, the details of the crime, and the impact statements from Lydia's family. He sentenced Trevor to 55 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 42 years under state guidelines. The sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and the consequences of the decisions Trevor made from the moment he stepped toward Lydia at the ATM. Lydia Heron was an accounts coordinator who followed a predictable routine after long shifts, stopping at the same strip mall ATM she had used many times before. On the night she died, she withdrew cash, walked back to her car, and didn't realize a man nearby had already targeted her. When she opened her door, she gave him the moment he needed to force his way inside, trapping her in a confined space where she had no chance to escape. That single decision brought her into contact with a stranger who turned a routine stop into the place where he attacked and killed her. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and share, and stay tuned for more stories.